Hello everyone and welcome to Sew with Jessica. For today's tutorial, we are making this beautiful simple dress with the Peter Pan collar, also with exaggerated hip line and a little puff sleeve. So for the fabrics, I used some button covers and I have them in black. I have a lot of them, but I'm using actually 6. Next, I have this lightweight cotton fabric in color black and I have 1/4 of a yard. This is not up to 1 yard at all. It is not up to half of a yard. It's very small and you don't need that much of it. Next, I have a lining fabric in color black and I'm using a very regular lining. It's not very lightweight, but it's a good lining and I have exactly 2 yards here. Last but not the least is the main character of the dress, which I am using this lovely African print here, and I have exactly 2 yards of this fabric here. And I also wanted to let you know that this is going to be a full tutorial. There will be no part 1 or 2, so let's get into the video proper. So I taped my pattern paper in order to get this length, and we are going to start with the front piece. So the first thing I did was to rule out a straight line at the top line there, and that line is going to serve as my starting line. So all my measurements will start from that line there. Now I'll mark my neck width of 3 inches. I'll just dot it there, and then I'll mark downwards 3 inches for the neck depth. Next, I'll connect those 2 points together with a curve. Still on that starting line, I'll take my shoulder measurements, divide it by 2 and mark what it gives me, which is 8 inches. Right at that point, I'll mark downwards 1 inch, and then I'll connect a slanted line from the neck width to meet that point there, which is going to be my shoulder slope. I'll place my tape down from the shoulder width. I'll take my round armhole measurement, divide it by 2 and mark what it gives me there, which is 8 inches. I'll make sure that the 8 inches is also sitting at the width of my shoulder measurement, so that the line will be very straight by the time I connect it downwards. And then I'll just rule out that point over there. Just make a straight line across. Place the tape from the tip of your shoulder measurement. Take your shoulder to your bust point measurement, mark it and make a straight line across that point. You also place the tape back at the tip of the shoulder measurement. You will take your shoulder to your under bust measurement. You will mark it right there and you rule out a straight line across that point. Moving on with the same pattern, you are going to take your shoulder to your waistline measurement and you're going to make a straight line across that point. And then the next point we are going to take would be from the shoulder to the hip line, and you're going to make a straight line across that point. Last but not the least, we are going to determine the full length of this dress, and I'm using 37, but I'm going to mark 38, which includes the hemming allowance. Now I will start indicating what each of these lines stands for. We have BP for bust point, we have UB for under bust, W for waist, HIP for hip, FL for full length. Now I'll proceed to take the armhole curve. I'm going to mark the midpoint of the armhole line, which is 4 inches. Right at that point, I will mark inwards 1/2 inch. Now I'll proceed to this armhole line that we already marked earlier, and I'm going to place my round bust measurement. I'll just take my round bust measurement, divide it by 4, and I'll mark what it gives me at that point, which is sitting right there. So I'll use my curve ruler and I'll connect a curve that I will make sure that a part of it is touching the shoulder width, a part is touching the 1/2 inch that was marked inwards, and a part is touching the bust measurements that I marked on that armhole line, and in one swipe I will get my armhole curve. Now we are going to find the dart line, and your dart line is your nipple to nipple measurement divided by 2. Mine gives me 4 inches, so I'm going to mark 4 inches on my bust point, on the under bust line, the waistline, and down to the full length. So once I've marked like those dots, once I've dotted it, I will just connect a straight line all through like this. Moving on with the dart, right at the under bust line there, I'm going to start taking my dart. So at the left side, the area facing the neckline, I'm going to mark 1/2 inch, just only at that side there. And then at the full length, I will still mark that same 1/2 inch. So if you're busty or not, make sure to maintain this very 1/2 inch here. So we'll connect it together as seen. We just connect a straight line all through as seen. Now coming to the right side, you are going to mark as much as you want depending on how busty you are. So I am marking exactly 2 inches right at that under bust line there, and also on the full length I will still mark 2 inches just at the right side. So if you're not busty, you should consider marking 1 inch to 1.5 inch thereabouts. So I will just map out a straight line as seen. Also, let's not forget that the bust point is the focus here. So I'll create a very nice curve from the under bust line to meet the bust point only at the right side. And at the left side, I'll connect a slanted line to meet the bust point. We'll move to the armhole curve and we are going to take the measurements of whatever we have along the armhole area. Remember, we've already marked our bust measurement on the armhole line. So whatever measurements we have there, we are going to divide that measurement by 2. And I have like 5 point something inches, so I'm going to mark that point. That is like the midpoint of our armhole curve. Remember, that's the actual armhole now, so we are going to mark the midpoint, which is right there. Bring back your armhole curve and you're going to create a really nice curve from this midpoint of the armhole line to meet the darts that we took at the left side. Okay, it's going to have to blend with the dart at the left side. Just make sure it blends nicely. So right at the midpoint of the armhole line, mark downwards 1 inch, which should be like the dart of the armhole area. And once you've marked that 1 inch, you're going to use the curved side of your curve ruler and you're going to create a nice curve to meet the second side of the dart. So you're going to make sure that the curve is not sharp, make sure it is blended. So I'll just go in with my free hand to blend it at that point there. So because of how the armhole area is curved, if you join these 2 pieces together after taking out that dart, you will notice that the cup area will become shorter than the upper part, and we do not want that. So we'll have to mark outside the armhole curve. We are going to have to recontour the armhole line. So we'll mark 1 inch out and we'll connect it out as seen and reblend it into the armhole line. This way, everything is going to be equal when you sew it together. So it's just a little difference, but it's very important. So we are going to take the armhole dart, which is 1 inch, and we are going to replace it on that armhole line there. Remember that we only have our exact bust measurement there. So we are going to replace that 1 inch at that point there. Now we can properly work on the neckline. So I'm going to mark the neck depth and I'm using 8.5 for the neck depth because I'm using a V neck. So I'm going to still maintain the 3 inches I have at the neck width. I will just connect those 2 points together as seen, and that's going to be my new neck or my neckline. At the under bust line, I will take my round under bust measurement. I will divide it by 4 and I'll mark what it gives me there. Now I'm going to take this dart measurement that I have here, which is a total of 2.5 inches, and I'm going to replace it at the other side. On the waistline, I will take my round waist measurements, divide it by 4, mark what it gives me, and I'll replace the dart measurement of 2.5 inches on the other side. On the hip line, I will take my round hip measurement, but I'm not using my exact hip measurement this time around. So my exact hip measurement is 42 and I used 48 instead of 42. That's a lot, I know, but that gave me the exaggerated hip line I wanted. So 48 divided by 4 is 12 instead of the regular 10.75 that I will use. So once I mark it, I'll replace the dart measurement there. I'll bring that hip measurement to the full length and I'll also replace the dart measurement I have there. Now I'll connect all these lines as seen, and once I'm done connecting these lines, I will start adding up my sewing allowance, of which I am using 1.5 inch, which you could use less if you'd want, but I like to have more just in case I become bigger. I'll indicate my patterns to be CF for center front and SF for side front. Now I can go ahead and cut this out. After taking out the darts, this is exactly what your front pieces should look like. The first thing we are going to mark on for the back piece is 1.5 inch at that point there, which is going to be for my zip allowance. So I'll just connect that zip allowance measurement with a straight line. So after taking the zip allowance, all our measurements will start from that zip allowance line. So at the top part there, I marked 3 inches, which is going to be for my neck width. Make sure it's same as the one used for the front piece. And then for the neck depth, I marked 1.5 inch. It's going to be a high neck. I'll connect those 2 points together with a curve, and right into the zip allowance, I will make it straight. Still on that starting line, I will mark down my shoulder measurements, which is similar to what we did in the front piece. And where I have it there, I will mark downwards 1 inch for the shoulder slope, and I'll connect a slanted line from the neckline to meet the 1 inch there. From the shoulder width, mark downwards your round armhole divide by 2, which gives me 8, and I'll connect a straight line down and I'll rule out that armhole line, just how we did with the front piece. Now mark your shoulder to your bust point, leaving your tape there. Mark your under bust line, mark your waistline, mark your hip line, and also mark your full length. Also note that these measurements were already taken in the front piece. It was already well explained. So once you mark it, you can just rule out the straight lines and indicate what each of these lines stands for. At the armhole line, I'll take my round bust measurements that I've already divided by 4, and I'll mark it right there. Now I'm going to mark the midpoint of this armhole line, which is 4 inches, and I'm just going to create a curve from the 4 inches to meet my bust point there. This time around, we don't need to mark inwards half an inch. Only the front armhole is supposed to be that defined. The back armhole does not need to be defined. At the armhole line, take your dart line, which is your nipple to nipple measurement, divide by 2. Mark it right there. From your waistline, mark downwards 4 inches or 6 inches. That is where the dart of the back piece would stop. Your dart should never in any occasion get to your hip line. So we are going to stop at 4 inches there, and we're going to mark the dart there. We'll just connect the dotted lines from the armhole line to the lower dart area with a straight line. So along the waistline, I'm going to mark 1 inch apart from the dart on both sides, 1 inch. And I'm going to connect a slanted line from this dart that I've taken to the top part and also to where the dart ends. Remember, we've taken our bust measurements at the armhole line. So now we'll move to my under bust line, take my round under bust, divide by 4, mark it and replace the exact measurement I have in the dart area of that side. I'll move to the waistline. I'll take my round waist measurement, divide by 4, and replace the 2 inches that we have in the dart area of that side. I'll move to my hip line and I'll mark my exaggerated hip measurements that I'm using 12. And I'll also mark that measurement on the full length. I'll connect all those lines together and I'll proceed to add my sewing allowance of 1.5 inch all through. For someone that is busty and experiences zip bulge, this shouldn't be your last step. So I'm going to explain why we usually experience zip bulge. If you look at this picture right here on the screen, you will see that the top part of our bodies, we have the bust at the front and the back is straight. And then for the lower bodies, we have the hip at the back and the front area is straight. So that means our half length for the top parts for the front piece has to be longer because of the bust that we have. There has to be longer than the back piece. In most cases, people take the measurements of the half length. That is, they'll place the tape on the shoulder line and they will take the measurements of the half length of the back piece. But let's say in a situation where you are sewing for a client that you didn't get to measure yourself and you are not able to take the half length of the back piece. This is where this very method I'm going to show you will come in. And then your full length is still going to be the same, despite the fact that the half length of your back piece is different. The full length has to be the same because of the hip, okay? Because the hip, like, it complements. So at the waistline, I'm going to extend that line into the zip just as seen. And I'm going to take the zip bulge, that's as I always call it. So what I do most times is to subtract some inches from that center, that waistline there. So I marked 1 inch apart from both the top part and the lower part. And I'm going to connect that line in a slanted form to meet my side seam. That's where I have my side measurements. That's where I'm going to connect it to me. So these 2 inches I use, it can change. Okay, it does not mean you have to exactly use 2 inches. Let's say if you're not busty, say where we took the dart for the front piece, it depends on how busty you are. So you can use 1.5 inch, you can even use 1 inch, half inch up, half inch down if that's what you want. So 1 inch up, 1 inch down works for me fine. So I'll just connect it up as seen to the side seam. Then you can now extend the line into the sewing allowance there. Just make sure it stops right where your exact measurements stop. So this is basically it, guys. By the time we close up this dart, you will see that the center back then has a curve. Okay, it's going to have a curve. Instead of you taking your regular bodice measurements and then subtracting some inches from the zip area, this method is going to make the zip align with your back. Like, it's going to, I don't know how to explain, you guys. Also, you will see that the full length of the center back will also be affected. You will see that the full length at the center back will be a bit shorter, but we'll fix that once we are transferring it to the fabric. So I placed all my patterns on the fabric, and this is every single thing. Like, this is the whole fabric that I have here. The length is not up to 60 inches, so of course the fabric is limited. So the only places I'll be adding allowance is going to be the center front dart area and the side front dart area, else the other parts does not need allowance. So this is how I'll cut the length of the back piece. You will see that I'm cutting it straight from the part where I have the side seam, right? I'm cutting it straight into the center back, and that's going to cover up for the uneven length. Remember that I've already added my hemming allowance to the fabric already. I told you I was using 37 for the full length and I used 38. So I cut the length straight, okay? That way the length is going to be equal. Now I'll go ahead and I'll cut out every other thing. You're not adding any other sewing allowance to this back piece again, because we already took the zip allowance and the side seams allowance. So the most you can add is towards the shoulder and the armhole area or the neckline. I'll cut out the lining of the back piece and I'll cut out exactly what I have right here. Next, I want to transfer the darts of the back piece to the fabric, and this is one of the easiest method I usually use. I'll fold the pattern paper into two, cut along the dart and just cut out the whole dart from the pattern paper. I'll place it on my fabric and I'm going to use this chalk. Use the blackboard chalk because the blackboard chalk is transferable. You see this industrial chalk, they are not transferable and they are also a bit hard to work with. They are not all that visible on all types of fabrics. So use this this blackboard chalk. It's transferable and it cleans off faster. So after shading off the dart area, I'm going to now bring in the second black piece. Make sure you're chalking this on the wrong face of the fabric. So you bring the second piece of the back piece, you will place them on each other, and then you will dust off the chalk on the second fabric, and then you can go up and sew the darts. We are also going to repeat this same process here to the lining of the back piece. So this is what the dart looks like. I will go ahead and iron it down. Make sure to repeat the same process to your lining piece as well. So I placed both my back pieces together and you will see that the center back has like a space. That is usually that's the effect of the zip bulge. So I'll place both my back pieces together. I'll place them right facing each other, and I'm going to sew up the 1.5 inch that we added for zip allowance. Remember that we did not touch the 1.5 inch. It's still intact. So we are going to sew exactly 1.5 inch all through. So I'm going to iron this out. I'm going to just open up the seams with my iron. And the reason why I'm opening this seam is just so I can have my zip allowance defined, because I'm still going to lose it out. But this makes fixing my zip very easy. I'll bring in my zip and I'll just place it up as seen. I'm going to mark where I want the zip to end, and I'll just give it chalk that part a little bit. So now I'm going to start losing from the neckline to that point. So this is a closer view of me fixing the zip. You will see that because I ironed the 1.5 inch, you will see that it is folded, the line is defined. So that is going to enable me fix my zip accurately on the parts where it's supposed to be fixed. just a simple tip. So now it's time to fix the lining. I'm going to bring my already prepped lining. Remember, we prepped it earlier, and I'm just going to place it like this. Just make sure that they align properly around the armhole area. So I'm going to hold it up at the sewing allowance. I'll just place it down, and then I'm going to sew right on that zip. Okay, just sew very close to the already sewn zip line, and just sew it all the way down. That way the sewing allowance will be hidden inside, and this will give you a very clean result. So this is a closer view of what it looks like. I'm going to repeat the same process to the other side seam there. Along the base, I had to reduce some inches from there so that I'll be able to turn the lower part so I can have a more better finished look. And after losing it up, this is how I placed it. I sewed that part, and then I flipped it over, ironed it, and then did the same thing to the other side. After I was done with the second side, this is what the base of the back piece looks like. Everything makes sense. So for the shoulder line, we are not going to turn the neckline yet, and we are not going to do anything to the shoulder yet. We'll keep the back piece aside and we'll start working on the front piece. So we have the center front and the side front. We are going to cut out the linings for the front pieces, and so I'll bring back my pattern, this particular one here. I'm going to cut to the under bust line. I'll just stop at the under bust line. Make sure not to add your sewing allowance. So we're going to use this wording here, and this wording I have here is the medium one, and you can use the hardest one too. So I'm going to use this wording, popularly known as the breast pad, to pad up the breast area of my blouse so it gives me more fitting. And I'm going to cut exactly as seen. So I'll just place it on the fabric and I'm going to iron it down. I also noticed that while I was ironing the fabric, the color was changing, but once there is no heat on the fabric at all, it goes back to the original color. I'll also do the same thing for the center front. I do not want the center front, the wording to get to the shoulder line, no, so I'll just trace out the area where I want the wording to be. And I'll cut it exactly as seen. I'll keep the patterns aside. I'll still come back to tape them back because I'll still need it. Now we're going to transfer this pattern to the wording, but make sure you are placing it on the fold because it's the center front. So once you place the wording on your center front, you're going to notice that it is not equal because, of course, the fabric has like sewing allowance, but the wording does not have. So I will split the wording at the center line there so that everything can lap where it should be properly. So you are going to iron the wording to the main fabric, and it's advisable to iron from the fabric because the wording is thick and it will take some time for the heat to get to the wording, so it's best to iron from the main fabric. Now I'm going to tape all my center front pieces together. Like I said, we'll still be needing it. So this is what all my front pieces looks like with the wording on them. I'm going to start pinning them together, and you are going to sew from the lower bodies upwards. I don't advise that you sew from the upper bodies down. It's best to sew from the lower bodies upwards. And yes, after sewing, this is what you should have. Next, you open up the seams that you've just sewn, and then when you get to the bust area, make sure to open up the seam on your tailor's arm or on a round surface. Just make sure you're not opening it on the bare floor like that. So by the time you open it like that, it's going to iron better. Make sure to also iron from the good face as well. And just because I don't want my fabrics to sustain any stain, I used another piece of fabric to like cover it so it does not stain like the main piece itself. So this very method I'm doing here is called piping. I know there are so many other things people do that are called piping, but when I learned how to sew way back in 2017, this is what we call piping. So it's just going to secure the open seam so that, I don't know, it just makes a lot of sense. So what I added there was paper stay. You can add gum stay, and you can also pipe in layers. You can add 2, 3 or 4, but I added only 1. And then sometimes you can run a bias strip before you even pipe, but that's another video for another day. Let me not confuse you. So now we are going to bring in the lining piece, and we are going to place our already prepped lining piece right face facing the right face of the fabric, and then we are going to sew along the base. After sewing, this is what it should look like. We are going to flip it over and we are going to iron it in place. Now we are going to bring the already prepped or already formed back piece. We're going to place them on each other, that's right face facing each other, and we are going to sew up the shoulders together. Now I'll proceed to attach the shoulders together for the lining piece. We just did for the main piece. We are going to attach the linings together. So once we are done, this is what everything looks like. This is the neckline, this is the shoulder area, this is the armhole area. We'll place everything back again, right face facing each other, and we're going to start sewing up the side seam allowance that I used 1.5 inch for. So I tried it on after I was done sewing. The waist was not very snatched, so I went on to slim the waist area again just by like very little, and currently it's still not very tight, but it's my size. And you will see very well that because I am here to iron it, the hip is looking somehow, so you're just going to iron it. Now we are going to move on to making the sleeve. I will use my blouse. I'll place it on the piece of fabric that I have. I didn't have much left to get the length I would have wanted to get, so I just managed what I had there. So after chalking out the bodies of the armhole on the fabric, I went ahead to redraw this in order to get this like puff sleeve. Yes, in order to get it, I had to like resketch like 3 inches upwards and just curve it down to meet the armhole line that I've already drawn. Now I'll go ahead and cut it out, and I'll transfer it to the lining piece. So I cut out 2 sleeves and I cut out their lining as well. I'm going to place them, that is the lining, on the right face of the main piece, and I'll sew along the base. So afterwards, this is what it looks like. I'm going to sew 1/2 inch along the base, which is going to be like a space for my elastic band to go through. After I created the channel for the elastic, along the curve part of the top part, I'm going to sew a very loose stitch, which I'm going to use to pull the gathers for the puff sleeve. So after pulling the gathers, you should have something that looks like this. So be it long sleeve or short sleeve, you should have a nice puff like this. I will insert the elastic into the elastic channel that was created, and I'm going to, after securing the elastic in there, I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to sew along the sewing allowance that I have there. That's basically it. I'll just attach the sleeve to the main dress, so we'll move on to making the collar. I actually do have like 2 different methods of how to make a Peter Pan collar, but I'm going to be showing you one which involves using the patterns, which is actually very easy. So you're going to bring your front and back patterns and you're going to place them along, you're going to tape them along the shoulder area. Make sure that the neckline of the back piece is facing the neckline of the front piece. So after you've taped it, we are going to fold in that zip allowance that we have there at the back piece, because we do not need a zip for the collar. So we are going to start marking according to what you want. I'll put a picture on the screen that shows the different types of Peter Pan collar, and I will start marking 4 inches all through to the base. I also did not want mine to have a curve, so I just went for that to redefine it to have, you know, a different shape like one of the ones on the screen. or indicates my pattern. The side along the front I indicate F, and then I have B for back. I also cut out that zip allowance there because we'll not be needing it. Now I'll transfer these patterns to my cotton fabric that I showed you guys earlier. I will just cut 2 of them, and I'll also cut lining pieces for the collar. Once I am done, I'll place them right facing each other, and I'm going to sew along the outer curve area. And basically this is what the sewing process looks like. Once you're done sewing, you notch so that it relaxes properly when you flip it over, of which I'm going to still be top stitching, which is totally optional, but I do love how professional it looked. And this is a closer view of how I top stitched it. Now we've come very close to the end. Last thing we are going to do will be to attach the collar to the blouse. This is also the closer view of the neckline of the dress. Remember, we have not touched the zip area. We did not fold it or anything. The neckline is the only unfinished place here. So this is what the collar should look like on the dress, but I'm going to fix it from inside out. So for the back area, you can just use your hand to tack that top part there so that it does not just move anyhow. And you guys will not believe that I tried on the dress and then the center front actually tore a bit. So it's made my neckline kind of like deeper than it should be, and I did not want to start cutting out the new collar. You guys already saw that I had limited cotton fabric, so I had to just fix one of my buttons at that point there. After sewing the button covers to the dress along the dart line, I just went ahead to give the dress to my weavers to have them weave every single thing so everything looks so nice. And that brings us to the end of this video. If you watched to this point, do well to subscribe, don't forget to like, don't forget to share, and see you in my next video. Bye.